What's the link between old-school music records and state-of-the-art research on microplastics?
Most old records are made from polyvinyl chloride, which in slang people call vinyl. When I lower the stylus onto the record, there's evidently friction there, which creates tiny particles. And those tiny particles can turn into a big problem.
Our resident DJ is Christian Laforge. His daytime job, professor of ecology.
I did a lot of DJing while I was at college and beforehand, starting with vinyl, then CDs, and finally digital. I spent 20 years DJing in a Munich club.
But now he's playing a different tune, hoping to rid the world of microplastics. Bayreuth, famous for its Richard Wagner Opera House and annual festival. But while the town looks immaculately clean on the surface, there's a less visible problem lurking on the streets that Christian Laforge has his sights on. Wherever he and his colleague go, they find the immediate culprit, plastic waste.
One day back when I started looking at the issue of plastic pollution, I decided to count the number of plastic fragments between my home and the supermarket. And over those 200 or 300 meters, I spotted 52 fragments of plastic with the naked eye while walking. And if I'd bent down like this, I would have found a lot more. They're simply everywhere. You can see how abrasion is creating more and more microplastic.
All the white bits.
A mass of tiny particles decomposing into microplastic.
So does this pose a danger to us?
Right now, we believe it's the small fragments that present the greatest danger. With smaller particles, there's a bigger risk that instead of just staying in the digestive tract and being excreted, they could pass into body tissue. And that could lead to inflammatory reactions.
Visible plastic waste is unsightly, but relatively easy to dispose of. Once it reaches the microscopic scale, however, it contaminates rivers, soil, and the air, all vital for our survival. And this is precisely the issue the two men are investigating. What effect do microplastics have on the environment and on us? It's a problem affecting the entire planet. Microplastics have now even been found in snow on the Svalbard archipelago in the Arctic Circle. A disturbing discovery. Can sewage treatment plants at least filter out microplastics from our water? Professor Christian Laforge from the University of Bayreuth is on a field trip. Behind the municipal sewage works, where the filtered wastewater is discharged into the local river. His team has devised their own manta trawl, a net for picking up the plastic particles.
Okay, time to launch Manta.
With little data available until recently, it's a pioneering field of research that requires innovation on the part of the scientists.
Like other research groups new to the issue, we thought it would be pretty straightforward. Just a matter of going out, taking samples, and performing an experiment. But these particles behave differently. They're a completely new class of substance and incredibly complex. People talk about microplastic in the environment, but it comes in a range of different shapes and sizes, different compositions, and different basic plastics. It's a really complex subject.
Verschiedene Grundkunststoffe, die damit beteiligt sind. Es ist einfach ein wahnsinnig komplexes Thema.
A challenge for the young research assistant, but also for a renowned professor who's not shy of pitching in on the physical side of research too.
These particles are incredibly hard to capture because you need different analytical methods, different forms of experiments, and completely different sampling scenarios. It's a lot more difficult to detect them and to do risk assessments. It's really exciting.
The first step in each survey is a distinctly low-tech affair, collecting and rinsing samples by hand. But actually finding the minute particles can be easier said than done.
Pour it all in, and there you go. With a few particles, you can see with your own eyes that they're plastic. Look, that little blue one here. And we'll see what all the white stuff is in the lab. But there's quite a lot in there.
Germans tend to think of their country as a clean one, but take a closer look and you'll find this. And that's just one part of the problem. The researchers believe that microplastics enter rivers via an untold array of routes. They want to know what impact they have once they get there. To assist their investigation of conditions on the bottom of the riverbed, they've brought along a special pump, another instrument they developed themselves.
Now carefully place it on top.
The pump presses the water from down below through special aluminum filters. Their perforations are a fraction of a millimeter wide, enabling the researchers to fish out particles that are invisible to the human eye. They're hoping to gain new insights, almost like on a mission to Mars. Back in the university lab, it's a question of rinse and repeat. The aim is to reduce the filtrate so that it only contains the microscopically small plastic articles. The sample is now put under the microscope. Doctoral student Julia Müller uses a pipette to distribute the substance in small portions onto specimen slides. Now that they're visible, she can weed out the plastic particles by hand, one at a time. An extremely laborious task. But it's the only option she has for a precise examination of the isolated fibers.
You can tell from the peaks that it's polyethylene.
Global research into microplastics is still a fairly new field, but one where the Bayreuth University team is leading the way. It boasts scientists from all manner of disciplines. Among them is Seema Argaval, a professor of chemistry.
Hello there, Seema.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Argaval is interested in the global perspective. She's familiar with the problem of plastic waste from her native India, which has given her an added incentive.
It's not solely about pure research. We also want to develop new solutions.
Seema Argaval has been looking at where the plastic pollution chain begins and hopes to find alternative materials to prevent microplastics being created in the first place. She regularly consults colleagues from various scientific disciplines.
This is very interesting to work with other people because sometimes the same material, same problem you see from different angles, and it really makes then Spaß.
But there's no Spaß or fun for the professor when it comes to the root of this growing global issue. Our garbage and what we do with it.
Yes, correct here. Yes, plastic mule is a very long problem, and the problem is when we don't manage our plastic waste properly, it is like cleaning my own yard and throwing this plastic waste into neighbor's yard. So I don't see my problem myself, but the problem is still there. And this was happening, so it's a very, very long problem because the plastic waste was not disposed properly, but it was thrown somewhere or sent to some other country and they were disposing not it properly. So this is the problem. So
is it possible to combat plastic waste with chemical formulas? Seema Argaval says yes. They enable the development of new substances with superior properties, a challenge she sees for all her fellow chemists.
it is the chemistry that makes plastics, and that's why the chemistry should solve it also, and the chemistry can solve it also. This PET, for example, we use for water bottles in large amounts, and this is a big problem. It is, if it goes by chance, it leaks in our environment, it stays in the environment for a long time. So chemistry can provide a nice material that works like PET, but by chance, if it leaks in our environment, it does not stay in our environment for a long time.
But how dangerous are microplastics for the environment and for us? Professor Lafoche's search for answers also features algae and daphnia, commonly known as water fleas.
There are the algae, which the daphnia feed off. You can see the haze of algae. And the first daphnia to notice it are the lucky ones because they're able to swim into this big cloud of food and get their fill.
But why water fleas?
I've been working with water fleas for quite some time. They're one of the model organisms in ecology, especially in aquatic ecology, because they're the link between unicellular algae and higher trophic levels. So a lot of fish like feeding on water fleas, making them a stock component of the ocean's nutritional network. The second factor behind using water fleas is that these are all females. Daphnia reproduce parthenogenetically or asexually. This provides us with genetically identical individuals for experiments, which means you can rule out genetic variability. It's a fantastic model organism because you can work with naturally produced clones.
That work involves a series of constantly repeated experiments using a variety of instruments. The researchers are still at a very early stage of their mission, but they're convinced that they'll be able to find answers and solutions, and also that we all have to change our habits.
Our treatment of the environment needs to be a lot more sustainable. It's up to us and the next generation to ensure that we're able to maintain our modern lifestyle. Of course, we also want to have comfortable lives, but we need to take a more sustainable and mindful approach to all the resources available.
The professor and diving enthusiast asks whether at some point in the near future, what we see in an aquarium will seem like a dream world, with nature destroyed by toxic substances created by humankind.
Hi, Benedict.
Hi.
Seema Argaval shows her students how to analyze the level of toxins contained in plastics, a vital step in assessing the dangers posed by microplastics.
It's pure or not, and we can try to find out additives, for example, in microplastic.
This machine can smell pollutants, especially the additives in synthetic materials, a primary focus in the work of the chemist and her team.
And you can see this sample is rather clean because we have one big peak at approximately 26 minutes.
If we talk about toxicity of microplastics, so it's not only the plastic material. So the pristine plastic materials, generally they are not toxic because they are long molecules. So it's the additive which we put in plastic for increasing its thermal stability, UV stability, giving a color to it or plasticizer to it, they might be toxic.
Professor Christian Lafoche and his team are on the road to the next hotspot. After taking those water samples, they now head out to a patch of farmland, again on the lookout for microplastics. Taking samples here is far more straightforward than time-consuming lab tests, and working outdoors makes for a refreshing change of environment. Julia Möller is doing her doctoral thesis on microplastics in soil. What impact do microplastics have on soil? Where do they come from, and where do they end up? Do they eventually just disintegrate? And are they really dangerous for us?
First, we can't even say how much plastic is actually out there, which is why we're doing this research. And we're not the only consumers here. Look at all the soil organisms living in our fields that are mostly beneficial. We need to know how much of this plastic is in the soil and what damage it does to those tiny creatures.
The field samples are sent straight to the lab at Bayreuth University. Julia Möller then transfers them to a sieve system in order to sort out the larger particles, a procedure that's not as simple as it might sound. The sieves are placed in a vibrator device, which shakes up the contents over a period of several hours in order to ensure a strict separation of the composite elements. It's only the tiniest particles that the researcher is interested in. Over in the adjacent lab, Sima Argaval and her fellow chemists are developing a new biodegradable synthetic material. Assuming they're successful, the aim is for it to one day be tested in a composting facility.
The facilities in this region only compost for 2 or 3 months, so it should be possible to completely decompose a biodegradable polymer in precisely that time frame.
The team is constantly working on new methodologies, in the process discovering new insights. They want the data they collect with their cutting-edge instruments to help them devise a kind of plastic that does not break down into minuscule pieces and cause harm to living organisms.
That it's degrading and everything is nice here. So first of all, we can say our material is biodegradable. Second, we can also comment how much it has biodegraded in how much time. And this is very important to comment. So when a new material comes to the market, this data is very important.
After water and soil, now it's time to look at the air. For this, the team deploys a special measuring mast. It was likewise built by hand at the university's dedicated workshop to cater to the precise requirements of the scientists. We all know about the exhaust fumes and particulate matter in the air that we breathe. But what about those invisible microplastics? Could they pose a similar danger? In order to imitate human air intake, the mast has a horizontal capture basket attached at head height. Ecologist and plastic in-air specialist Jakob Oster also frequently wonders whether he's constantly breathing in the tiny particles.
Maybe it's a subconscious thing. Maybe. But it does make you more aware of the things around you, which is a bit scary.
The mast is left in place for a number of hours. As the air streams through the basket's nets, the team suspects it will leave behind some of those microscopically small plastic particles. The smaller the particles are, the bigger the subsequent challenge in the lab. The various scientists have already spent several years refining and improving their methods, and sometimes discarding them. But their combined efforts have proved productive. Our knowledge of microplastics has improved significantly compared to just a decade ago, thanks also to the researchers in Bayreuth and their extensive deployment of new technology. Jakob Oster uses a scanning electron microscope to render the invisible plastic visible. The machine helps to both count the particles and determine their constituent elements. The collaborative research effort brings together a range of institutes at different locations, all working on the same subject. This is research for the future that is also relevant today. The results are now available from the samples taken out in the field and from wastewater. It can take days, if not weeks, to process the material for the researchers to finally access the actual microplastic content and produce a detailed analysis.
The summary shows pretty clearly that we have both larger fragments, but above all, smaller ones. What was the average size in the sample?
Around 50 microns.
That's 50 thousandths of a millimeter. But it's the particle's content, not size, that the researchers are interested in.
That's polyethylene.
PE, as you can see here very nicely in the reverse image. And the chemical characterization has clearly identified it as PE.
And polyethylene, or PE, has an extremely long life, making it a particularly ominous adversary for the researchers and is a significant source of microplastics. But there are signs of progress elsewhere. These candies from China are wrapped in a piece of rice paper that is itself edible.
This was eatable packaging material, and one can eat also. And the idea will never be that we start throwing this packaging outside in the environment. This will be a very bad message. Never. We are not developing anything so that everybody starts throwing in the environment. No. We are developing something that can be recycled, that can be managed in a waste management procedure like the normal plastics. But if by chance, intentionally or unintentionally, it gets leaked in the environment, it does not persist like other polyolefins in the environment there.
So how do our bodies react when we take in microplastics? Here, the researchers are discussing images of animal cells. Today, we know that our digestive tracts contain microplastics. But what happens then? Some of these images show how the plastics are absorbed by the cells. In this case, in a mouse.
We've shown that the cells absorb the particles and that the intake is higher if there was already microplastic in the environment. But the big question is whether there's this effect with humans, too.
We also know, even if not the reasons why, that the so-called gut microbiome changes depending on the types of plastic in the colon. The gut microbiome is really important for taking up particular nutrients, but is also essential for our immune system, of course. We do now know that the plastic affects the composition of our colon's microorganisms for whatever reason, and that can have a negative impact on them, because it means a disturbance of the natural gut microbiota.
The team from Bayreuth hopes to get answers at the University of Erlangen, a leading center of medical research. Here, too, there are specialists working in the Microplastics Collaborative Project. They're likewise looking into what effect plastic particles have in human body cells. What might the long-term consequences be for our health? And how high is the risk of them causing cancer? The researchers from Bayreuth present their images of the mouse cells to Professor of Anatomy Friedrich Paulsen and ask whether these findings can be applied to humans.
You have to look at the potential influence on tumor development and whether it promotes chronic diseases, degenerative changes such as rheumatic conditions, or degenerative diseases affecting, say, the cartilage and the musculoskeletal system.
And some companies are also on board the general research mission. Rehau is a major international supplier of polymer-based products and is also based in Erlangen. Chemist Seema Agarwal is eager to join forces with industry in order to identify and develop solutions. Solutions that from stage one of the manufacturing chain mean looking at how to prevent microplastics actually being created. Rehau's head of sustainability, Andreas Jenner, explains the composition of a new garden hose. To the pleasant surprise of Seema Agarwal, he confirms that, yes, the material can be recycled. But there's a lot of work to be done. Tire wear is a major source of microplastic emissions, a problem that Rehau is also tackling. It's working on a filter that could be installed in road drainage systems in order to collect the particles resulting from that abrasion. Here, industry and researchers have the common goal of ensuring that our environment is a healthy one.
And this, what I see from my colleagues, my contacts all over the world, is that everybody has the same opinion. We have to do something with our resources so that our future generations, they have sufficient. I think this is one of the definitions of sustainability also, that we should not waste our resources. We should enjoy presence without sacrificing the future.
Christian Laforge is back on the road to look at another exciting new development. He's come to Röthenbach, also near Bayreuth, to meet inventor Sebastian Peukert. His new construction would be deployed where the professor sees the most obvious need, a sewage treatment plant. The machine is specifically designed to filter out microplastics from the wastewater. The local mayor has also come along. He would ultimately buy the pilot facility. But first, Sebastian Peukert gives the lowdown on his ingenious, simple-sounding invention.
The idea occurred to me in the middle of the night. I woke up at 3 a.m. after having read an article by Christian Laforge. I thought, hell, why not give it a try? So the next day I made a sketch of how it might work, and the way we built it is practically identical to that sketch.
His idea was for a special kind of hydrocyclone machine. During the cleaning process, it subjects the water to massive centrifugal forces that push the plastic particles to the inside, where they can be separated off. Initial testing at the treatment plant has produced promising results, with the majority of the microplastics being removed from the wastewater. The mayor of Röthenbach sees it as an investment in the future of his community.
Mikroplastik ist nicht sichtbar.
Microplastics are not visible, but people are aware of them. There's been totally positive feedback in newspaper reports about the pilot facility. It's a great thing that's good for the environment. It only adds a couple of euros more a year to the wastewater bill, and that's something everyone can afford.
So this treatment plant, at least, should soon have no more microplastics after cleaning its wastewater.
I love it because our objective was always about finding solutions, not just highlighting all the bad things. It's the same principle with our special research project. Instead of focusing on pure research, we also look for answers.
But when it comes to answers, what's the personal feeling of the new filter's inventor? What does realizing a vision feel like?
It can feel like tilting at windmills or that you're a pioneer. We're not going to get the plastic problem under control overnight. Plastic in our environment is going to remain an issue for centuries or millennia. What matters now is finding a way of minimizing the sources of contamination.
And that's a task that enjoys total commitment from the researchers at Bayreuth University. They face a long road ahead, with no end of further experiments in their quest for solutions. And always in the mix, the DJ turned professor on a mission to make the world a groovier place by making microplastics history.